In the heart of the South Caucasus, where the borders of Azerbaijan, Armenia, Iran, and Turkey almost touch, a single strip of land has become one of the most talked about corridors in Eurasia. It's called the Zangezur Corridor, a proposed transport link that could reshape trade routes, connect isolated regions, and redefine how East meets West. But what exactly is this corridor? Why is it so strategically important? And what could it mean for the future of the region? To understand the Zangezur Corridor, we first need to step back and look at the geography. Azerbaijan is divided into two main parts, the large mainland on the Caspian Sea and a smaller exclave called Nakhchivan, separated by a thin piece of Armenian territory. This narrow gap, located in Armenia's southern Siunic province, is what stands between Azerbaijan and its exclave. For decades, there has been no direct land route connecting the two. Goods and people had to travel through Iran or by air. But after the 2020 ceasefire that ended the Second Karabakh conflict, a new idea re-emerged: the reopening of a transport corridor through this southern strip of Armenia, linking mainland Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, and beyond that, to Turkey. The proposed route, the so-called Zangezur Corridor, takes its name from the historical Zangezur region, once part of eastern Armenia and western Azerbaijan. Today, the name is used symbolically to describe a potential new trade artery that could connect the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean. From a logistical point of view, the corridor would serve as a direct link from Baku to Nakhchivan, through southern Armenia, and onward to Kars in eastern Turkey. It would include railways, highways, and potentially pipelines, forming a continuous transport chain from the Caspian to Europe. But to truly understand its potential, we have to look at the bigger picture. For Azerbaijan, the Zangezur Corridor would eliminate the geographical separation between its territories, turning the country into a unified land bridge. For Turkey, it would provide a direct overland route to the Turkic world of Central Asia. For Russia and Iran, it presents both opportunities and challenges, reshaping how goods move across the region and how influence is distributed. In short, this narrow passageway could shift trade flows across an entire continent. The South Caucasus has always been a crossroads between the Persian Empire and the Roman world, between the Silk Road and the oil routes of the Caspian. In that sense, the Zangezur project isn't just about politics. It's about geography. It's about the physical reality that whoever controls the corridors controls the connections. Modern Azerbaijan has spent the last 2 decades investing heavily in infrastructure, from the Baku to Tbilisi, Kars Railway to the new port of Alat on the Caspian Sea. These projects are part of a long-term vision to make Azerbaijan a transport and logistics hub between Europe and Asia. The Zangezur Corridor would be a key piece of that puzzle, completing a direct route from the Caspian Basin to the Mediterranean and Black Seas. Economically, such a link could open enormous potential. Freight trains could travel from China's western provinces, cross Central Asia to the Caspian Sea, enter Azerbaijan, pass through southern Armenia, and reach Turkey, a route far shorter and potentially faster than maritime shipping through the Suez Canal. This concept aligns closely with global initiatives like the Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, which aims to connect Asia and Europe via the Caucasus. The Zangezur segment could strengthen that connection, making the South Caucasus an even more critical part of Eurasian logistics. But like most major infrastructure projects in geopolitically sensitive areas, the Zangezur Corridor isn't just an engineering challenge, it's also a diplomatic one. Different countries and organizations view the project through different lenses. Azerbaijan emphasizes its economic and regional connectivity potential. Armenia has expressed concerns about sovereignty, security, and the political framing of the term corridor. International analysts, meanwhile, often describe it as part of a broader regional realignment, where infrastructure becomes a form of diplomacy. From a neutral standpoint, it's clear that such a corridor could benefit multiple countries if implemented cooperatively, with full respect for each nation's borders and agreements. Improved connectivity could mean faster trade, more tourism, and shared economic growth across the region. Let's imagine what that might look like in practice. A freight train leaves the Chinese city of Xi'an, crosses Kazakhstan, sails across the Caspian Sea to Baku, then moves west through the Zangezur link to Nakhchivan, into Turkey, and finally to Europe. The entire route could take less than 2 weeks, about half the time of current sea routes. If realized, that efficiency could make Azerbaijan and its neighbors central players in global supply chains. The Caspian Sea would no longer be seen as a dead end. It would become the midpoint of a new Eurasian highway. But there's another layer to the story: local development. Southern Armenia's Siunic region, through which the corridor might pass, is mountainous but rich in history and culture. If trade routes reopen, they could bring new economic opportunities to communities along the path, from logistics centers and border terminals to tourism and small business development. Similarly, Nakhchivan could see renewed trade and tourism, reconnecting it more closely with the rest of Azerbaijan and its regional partners. For ordinary people, that could mean jobs, travel, and access to goods that were once distant. Still, such transformations take time and depend on stable, cooperative regional relations. The Caucasus has seen rapid change before, and history shows that infrastructure can either unite or divide, depending on how it's managed. To grasp the scale of the challenge, consider the engineering itself. The terrain of southern Armenia and Nakhchivan is rugged, with deep valleys and mountain passes. Building modern railways and highways through this landscape would require tunnels, bridges, and high investment. Azerbaijan has already begun upgrading nearby infrastructure, including rail lines toward its western borders, while Turkey continues to expand its eastern logistics network. Even partial completion of the route could improve connectivity. For instance, the Baku-Nakhchivan-Kars corridor could still function if alternative routes via Iran are used temporarily. That flexibility keeps the concept alive while negotiations continue. Another interesting dimension is how the Zangezur project ties into Azerbaijan's growing role in global energy and transport networks. With oil and gas pipelines already running westward, Azerbaijan's next step is to expand its non-energy logistics, to diversify the economy and make use of its strategic geography. The country's leadership has repeatedly described transport as a new pillar of national development. In many ways, the corridor symbolizes that shift from energy exporter to multi-sector connector. It's about turning geography into opportunity. For Turkey, the corridor is also significant. It would strengthen its eastward links and provide another land connection with Turkic-speaking nations across Central Asia, something Turkish leaders often refer to as a corridor of brotherhood. For Europe, it could offer an alternative supply route, one that bypasses traditional choke points and provides more resilient logistics. Meanwhile, Russia, Iran, and China are also watching closely. Each has interests in how new routes are formed, whether through the Caucasus, Central Asia, or the Middle East. In that sense, the Zangezur Corridor is not just a regional project. It's part of a wider story of how the 21st century is redrawing the world's trade map. The questions surrounding it, who builds it, who manages it, and who benefits most, are still evolving. But one thing is clear: the South Caucasus is once again becoming a bridge between continents, just as it was on the ancient Silk Road. Projects like this remind us that infrastructure is never just concrete and steel. It's about people, connections, and the movement of ideas. When a new road opens, it doesn't just move goods, it moves opportunities. Today, Azerbaijan continues to expand its highways, ports, and airports. The government has announced plans for industrial zones, free economic areas, and new railway investments to integrate more deeply with global supply chains. Whether the Zangezur route becomes a reality or not, the country's direction is clear: toward connectivity, diversification, and development. If completed, the corridor could transform Azerbaijan from a regional energy hub into a transcontinental logistics hub, a place where goods from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East converge. It could also help smaller communities in both Armenia and Azerbaijan access trade networks, spurring inclusive growth. But it's important to remember that any such transformation depends on cooperation and stability. For a project like this to succeed, all countries involved would need to agree on border controls, customs procedures, and shared regulations. That requires diplomacy, patience, and trust, values that are just as essential as engineering. In a way, that's what makes the Zangezur Corridor fascinating. It's not just a question of infrastructure. It's a question of how nations connect, how regions cooperate, and how history can evolve toward partnership rather than division. The South Caucasus has long been a place where geography challenges politics, where mountains and valleys divide, but rivers and trade routes unite. Perhaps the greatest promise of the Zangezur Corridor is not only economic but symbolic, the idea that even in one of the world's most complex regions, cooperation can still pave the road forward. The story of this corridor is still unfolding. Plans are drawn, routes are debated, and engineers continue their work. No one yet knows when or exactly how it will be completed. But whether it opens in full or partially, the idea behind it has already reshaped how we see this part of the world, not as a borderland, but as a bridge. For now, the Zangezur Corridor remains a vision, a blueprint for a more connected future. But it reminds us that in every map, the lines that connect are just as important as the ones that divide. And as always, if this story inspired you to learn more, take the time to explore further. Research for yourself, read multiple perspectives, and look deeper into how infrastructure projects like this are changing not just landscapes, but futures. Thanks for watching. How do you think this will play out?